It is mid-October here and the basil is still growing fantastically in the polytunnel. But we're not too far off those first frosts, and basil is one of the things that collapses the moment we hit the cold temperatures. So it's now a race to start preserving it so that we have that beautiful fresh basil flavour throughout the winter, and I'm going to show you how I do it without it going black. So there's a couple of methods. The first method for preserving basil for the winter is the most logical, which is to dry it. So I would take these sprigs, lay them out in the dehydrator, wait until they're completely dehydrated and crispy, crumble them up and store them. Here's some I made earlier. In fact, these are the very last bits of my basil from last year, which was done exactly that way. Dried, crumbled, and I've been using it all year. But dried basil has a completely different flavour to fresh basil. It's a completely different kettle of fish. So the idea here is to preserve that really beautiful, vibrant, fresh flavour that you get with basil in the summer, but for use in the winter. Now freezing's the obvious way to go with that. There's a little bit of a hiccup in the sense that basil doesn't freeze very well. Basil is a very tender plant and it goes black and all the leaves fall off. Now, if I just chucked this bowl of basil into the freezer, the same thing would happen and I end up with a bit of a mess. You can, if you're very, very careful, take individual leaves off and lay them on a baking tray and freeze them very quickly. You'll maintain that green colour and then you can bag them up and sort of use them during the winter. The problem with that is that the only time you really want to use whole basil leaves like this, big in this sense, is if you've got a beautiful fresh tomato salad or something and you want to lay the basil leaves over the top. Well, a defrosted basil leaf is not a pleasant thing. Fine to cook with, but you don't really want a whole basil leaf chucked in your stew. So the answer is to whiz it up. Now, obviously, the most common thing that people do with their basil anyway is making pesto. You can freeze pesto. In fact, you could do exactly this with pesto, but what I'm going to do is take the parmesan and the pine nuts out of it. I'm going to whiz up my basil in olive oil, salt and garlic. Now, if you just want the basil, just basil and oil works perfectly well. And if you're not entirely sure what you're going to be using it for, then probably best to err away from the salt and garlic, in case that whatever you're making later on, it just doesn't really want that. But I know what I'm going to be using this for. And with that garlic and the salt and the oil in there, I know what kind of pop of flavour I'm going to be getting from it. So that's what I'm going to do. Whiz it up. In the oil stops it going black. So you still maintain that real vibrant green colour, but it's already chopped. And when you chuck that into your soup or your stew or into your pasta pan and put a load of butter in it and you chuck a couple of these cubes in, absolutely fantastic. Your basil's already chopped up, so you're not having to blacken the edges. And because you're cooking with it, the fact that the texture of it has changed slightly is not so much of an issue. It really is just that vibrant flavour that you've had in the summer, preserved for winter. So I have a lot of this, but you can see there's a bit of a mismatch in size here. This is how much basil I've got, and this is the size of my whizzer. Now, if you've got a beautiful, big, magical, industrial whizzer, well done, you can do it all in one hit. I don't have that, I've just got that little thing, so it's going to be a bit of a slow process. Additionally, I actually only have one ice cube tray. I do have more ice cube trays, but I use them for my wine in the evening if I've forgotten to put the wine in the fridge soon enough. And I don't want garlic flavoured ice cubes, because it doesn't matter what you do, the flavour of garlic does not come out. I've made this mistake before. So I've got a brand new set of ice cube trays here, which I'm going to use purely for this, and I'm going to make it in batches, just enough for that. Now, basil doesn't survive particularly well once you've picked it. Obviously, if you've only got a few sprigs, you know, if you've got a couple of bunches like this, just put it in a bucket of water and that'll survive absolutely fine. I've got a little bit too much there to do that with. And also I had this, you can see it's a little bit wilty. I had this in a plastic bag from when we brought it home from the allotment yesterday. And I'd forgotten that actually we've turned the central heating on in the house. And so overnight it got a little bit warm. So it's not exactly buoyant at the moment, but it's still perfectly good enough for what we're doing with it. But yeah, so I'm going to be doing this in really tiny batches, but that's all right. It's often the way with things when you grow your own, isn't it? That you spend all that time growing it and then you spend 3 times the amount of time processing it and chopping it and storing it for winter and all of that kind of stuff. Right, I need some garlic. Not homegrown. I can't grow garlic for love nor money. We have got white rot in the soil and plenty of allium leaf miner just waiting to pounce, and so all of my garlic comes out rotten. I've bought this. I know. The shame, the shame. There's no real point in using fantastic olive oil for this because the end result is going to be for cooking. You can drizzle the good stuff on at the end, but for this, it's not really worth it. Good glug. What did I do with my lid? It doesn't matter how much you put in that first wave, the moment you hit the blitz button, obviously it starts reducing massively. So you just keep topping up with the basil. I've put 1 garlic clove in the bottom of here and a pinch of coarse salt. I won't top that up, I'll just keep adding the basil. The consistency you're looking for kind of depends on what you're going to be using it for at the end. I try not to go anywhere into kind of puree territory. I want to keep the basil nice and chopped rather than sort of a smooth paste. And enough olive oil so that it's fully coated, and when you put it into the ice cubes they're going to form a nice dense paste rather than it be dry and crumbly when you take them out of the freezer. Okay, I think that is about as much as I can fit in my ice cube trays. Get a spoon. As you can see, that colour is incredible and it will keep that. That is really, it's well mixed and well chopped, but it's not complete sludge. It will keep its colour like this for a good few days if you put it in an airtight container. So if you didn't want to stretch out doing this every day and you just wanted to whiz it all up in one hit and then slowly freeze it over the next couple of days, you could definitely do that. You wouldn't want to keep it long term like this because it will go brown and nasty. But if you can do it over a couple of days, you should be fine. Well, it looks like I could fit a little bit more in here actually. Let's go again. I've slightly underestimated the size of this new ice cube tray, so I'm just going to do a few more in here rather than waste the 2 cubes at the bottom. Right chaps, technical disaster. This has been crumbling for a long time, admittedly. It is a very hard worked piece of kit, but my phone has just leapt out of the tripod that you are currently on and smashed into the pot, and it has finally broken the last bit that allowed me to use the whizzer. This is the safety catch that goes on the back, that when you turn it, it allows you to push the button so that your fingers aren't in it. 'Tis broke. So it looks like that is as much of this tray as I'm going to fill for the moment. pat, pat, pat. This is quite an interesting tray actually, in the sense that it's got a lid. I have made this error before. I mean, putting water in the fridge in a open topped ice cube tray is dangerous enough, but at least the only thing that's spilling out is water. When it's sort of herby green sludge, it's not so good if that's everything in your freezer is coated in that. So this one's got a lid. It's got a little pour. I think that's where you're supposed to put water in if you're doing it with water, but for the sludge, that is that's as far as we're going to get today, I'm afraid, chaps. In fact, I might just whiz out to Kingston and see if I could buy, whiz to Kingston to buy a whizzer. Whiz is the word of the day. Okay, well, I'm going to put this in the freezer. We'll go and see if we buy another little food processor chopper thing. If not, I'll just see you back here to decant these in probably tomorrow. Okay, yep, we're off. Mission to Kingston. Oh, and it's raining. Fab. It's beautiful now. Stunning coming down here. Okie dokie, let's try that again, shall we? Good morning of day 2 of basil preserving. One advantage of that is that I can show you the frozen ice cubes. Let's go pop some out. Okay, I'm going to put them straight into a little bag because it's oil, they start melting incredibly quickly after you take them out of here, so it's best to handle them as little as possible. Sorry, the cat doesn't like the fact that I've got the door closed. One sec. Do you want out, Boons? Do you want out, Bubba? Go on, out you go. It's all right, now I've stuck her on the other side, she'll be crying to come in, but never mind. Okay, let's see how the new ice block has taken. Oh, they look good. Okay. Right. I'm going to handle this as little as possible, but you can see it's still really, it's gone a bit sad on top, which is what happens when you just open freeze them. But when they're stuck in the olive oil and frozen like that, perfect little block to drop in to a soup or a stew, or like I said, just drop it in the pan once you've drained your pasta. Stick it in there. Oh, just lovely. To keep that really fresh taste is just brilliant. Right, that is the first wave done. God, this having the rubber bottoms on here is really good. They come out really easily. Okay, look, I'm going to get that in the freezer like ASAP because, like I say, they defrost in a jiffy. And we still have all of this basil to do, so I am just going to crack on with this. This is the new whiz. Haven't tried it with the basil yet, but it's actually considerably bigger, so I should be able to get quite a lot done in one hit and get some more frozen. Fill that ice tray again, and then I'm actually going to set some off to dry. You know, I was saying the dried basil that's got a completely different flavour but is equally useful, like in the kitchen, really delicious. I'm going to set some of this off to dry. So let's get cracking with this. Okay, that's showing the problem with using a device that you're not so familiar with, is that I've wildly underestimated that, so I'm going to have to do another round. But while I'm whizzing that up, I'm just going to set some basil off to dry. Let me go and get the dryer. So this is the one that I use. It is a bargain one off Amazon. I thought I was buying this as a sort of all try out one of whether I wanted to actually spend any money on a more expensive one, because this was about £22. It's super cheap. And I just thought I would give it a go. And then if I loved it, then I could, you know, think about buying a bigger one or a better one, supposedly better. And I found this to be absolutely excellent and have had no need to buy a better one. So the 20 quid one came up trumps. All you do is separate, so it's in these layers like this. You just lay your leaves down in this. I mean, I've used this for everything. And in fact, my next week's video is going to be about making chili powder from these guys, which is going to be made in here, or at least the drying process is going to be made in here. Right, let's lay some leaves out. I dry all sorts of things in this. Like I said, the chilies is one, but loads of herbs, all of the things like sage. So that's the thing, okay. So a bit like how freezing this basil really maintains that super freshness of it. I find obviously sage you can just hang up and it dries fine, you know, like over a radiator or whatnot, or even just in the kitchen. It will dry out fine, and then you can just stick it in a jar or whatnot and use it later. But I found using a dehydrator like this, because you're drying it out just that bit faster, the flavour is way more intense. It's much closer to what fresh sage is like, you know, because the flavour of sage doesn't change wildly between it being dried and fresh. It's not like polar opposites like the basil. But you do lose a little bit of that really intense hit of flavour that you get with fresh sage. And putting it in the dehydrator, I found you just keep that. It's just that it's dried. So let's just spread these out. I don't want to put too many on a layer of this, because I want the basil to dry quite quickly so that it does keep its... You see some of these have really gone, look at that. I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to use that. Some of these are all right though. I'll put a link to this, where I bought this dehydrator from, underneath the video, because I've been well impressed with it. And I've recommended it to a lot of people who've also been pleased with it. So it's not just me. You know, you often end up with kitchen gadgets that seem like a good idea at the time. And actually... Oh, there's a bay leaf in there. And actually, they turn out to just be a waste of space, and you very rarely get them out, and they take up a lot of room, because this is not small, you know, it does take up a bit of space. It's like, it takes up a big chunk of the cupboard. But this time of year, it's being used all the time. And then as I've had it longer, I've started using it for more and more things. It's not just at this time of year when you start trying to keep things for winter and use it all year round. Excellent thing. Right, that is 5 layers of basil set to go. I'm going to just go and plug this in and set it off. I'll tell you another advantage of these things is when you are drying things in them, and they go at a very, very low heat with a fan running, so it's like you just get the whole house smells of whatever it is you're drying, which is lovely when it's something like basil. It's a strange smell when it's chilies, I can tell you. Set that on there. Can you see me? Yes, you can. Because the basils are such a fine leaf, I put it on about a medium heat, and it's about 24 hours until they're proper dry. And you want to make sure they're really, really dry. They have to be crumbly to the touch, almost like burnt newspaper, because otherwise they will just rot in the jar if there's any moisture whatsoever. You can tip these out into a spice grinder and grind them up that way if you prefer, but what you get out of that is a really, really fine powder, and I'm after something a little bit rougher, so I just use my hands, making sure that they're completely dry as well, and no oil or grease or anything, just really, really clean, dry hands, and crush them in your palm. They should crumble really, really easily and have no kind of bend in them whatsoever, straight into the jar, and they will stay like that, well, I mean for years really, but I suppose eventually they will lose their potency. So you want to use them probably within the year. We've probably got one more decent big harvest off the basil that's in that polytunnel. It is currently just coming to the end of October, and now first real cold weather normally hits about mid-November. Sometimes you get an early freak cold snap, you know, but generally I'll keep an eye on the weather, and before that real cold hits, I'll take all the basil out, because there's no way it's going to survive once the weather gets cold. It really doesn't. It sulks, it goes black, like I was saying, and it gets a lot of mold on it. It's just not happy in the cold weather. So I will take everything I can off it before the cold, and I will do this same process again, so we are fully stocked for the winter. I will stick a link to this thing underneath, and the thing is the bargain one. There's loads of different types. I wouldn't necessarily, you don't have to get the one I've got, but I'll put the link to it under there so you can see the spec. I'll put a link to this new one under the show notes as well. Although I would say it's very good, it's very sharp, but my other one was really dinky and great, and they do still sell them, so I'll put a link to that as well. If they just didn't have them in the shop and we needed it pretty pronto rather than, you know, ordering it for long delivery. So yeah, so that is me preserving basil for the winter to get that real beautiful summer flavour. And I can tell you the smell in here right now is absolutely fantastic. Right, I'll see you back on the allotment next week.